I know I'm pretty late to the party again on this one, but it's finally time to talk about Can't Fear Your Own World Volume 2. And you can see just from a cursory glance that this is a considerably chunkier installment than the previous volume. However, when reading it, I actually found it to be more focused in many areas than Volume 1, where Volume 1 spends a lot of its time necessarily setting up a bunch of plot threads and where they want the story to go. This one focuses things down to a couple of central conflicts. You know, the bulk of this book is centered around a huge fight going on in the Rukongai between a number of different races. And, the spectacle is just absolutely crazy, and the whole thing kind of veers on fan fiction level wish fulfillment to some degree, which I'll get into in a minute, and that's absolutely not a bad thing. You know, as a huge Bleach fan, this book and the first volume have numerous real deep cuts, I think, that really make it worth your while as a Bleach fan to be reading these. So, we're going to finally talk about this volume. Much like Volume 1's video, I'm not going to be doing a meticulous, granular, chapter-by-chapter summary. We're just going to be looking at an overview of the story on the whole, looking at some of my favourite parts and the bits that really stood out to me, while trying to dissect Can't Fear Your Own World in general. Before we begin, if you haven't subscribed yet, guys, make sure to hit that button now. If you're a Bleach fan, you're in the perfect place for content like this every single week. Don't forget to give the video a thumbs up as well, because it really does help support the channel. And speaking of, we do now have a Patreon as well. If you want to support the channel a bit more, if you enjoy what I'm doing here, head on over there and see if there's anything that takes your interest. You can support the channel for as little as £1 a month. And I just want to say a huge thank you to everyone who has already done that. I really appreciate it. So yeah, much like with the first video, I am anticipating this one will be quite lengthy. Like I said though, I am really going to try and stick to this being an overview. So, following on from Can't Fear Your Own World, Volume 1, this villainous noble Tokinada Suna Yashiro is up to no good. He's working with this strange child called Hikone, who seems to want to become the king of all worlds at Tokinada's urging. And he's already started a huge fight in Waco Mundo. Waco Mundo is now on red alert as far as what's going on here. And the battles seem to be moving now towards Soul Society. The bulk of the fighting in this volume seems to be done in Rukongai, getting the attention of a bunch of captains and stuff like that, and then it transitions to where it seems the final showdown is going to take place. So there's a lot of interesting stuff in here, and this volume really kind of deepens the previously established lore, looks at the histories of both previously established characters and brand new characters for Can't Fear Your Own World, but crucially, all points are converging at eventually having to try and stop Tokinada from what he wants to do, what he wants to achieve. So I think before moving on, let's address Tokinada, because he is pretty much the main character of this new story, as far as new characters go anyway. Hisagi is your focus point, your protagonist, but Tokinada is the driver of all the conflict, and I still find him to be pretty interesting. And so the book actually opens with a look at a seemingly younger Tokinada talking to his father, and we gain some really interesting insight into Tokinada's worldview and what kind of is pushing him to be the person he wants to be. And Tokinada's kind of fascinating to me in a way. Whether I've got a completely perfect handle on his character yet or not, I'm not sure. But I really enjoy that he is evil for the sake of being evil, essentially. Like, he knows that there is malice and spite in his heart, and he wants to kind of just cause misery and pain all across the world just because he thinks the world is rotten like that, and he thinks that that's essentially how everyone should act. It's kind of a nihilistic worldview, but he sees seemingly only the worst aspects of the world. And what's interesting is he mentions here at the start of this book that if Soul Society hadn't given him reason to believe that his worldview was correct, he would have still been a horrible person. Like, he would have just committed crimes, but like noble crime, like almost like, the kind of crimes expected of the class system, essentially. Like, he would have just been a horrible nobleman. However, during his time in this little mini almost flashback, we find out that as he got a bit older, he spends time going through like these restricted archives and stuff like that, and he discovers Soul Society's original sin, which we still don't really know the gist of in this book. I think that's going to be the third book we'll find some of that out of. There are hints towards the Soul King in this early section as well, but Tokinada, upon discovering this secret, realizes that Soul Society is in fact rotten to its core. He takes great pleasure in that, realizing that Soul Society's vileness vindicates him as a human being, as who he wants to be, because Soul Society he believes to be truly evil at its core, and it has proven itself to be. He can now act in that same callous way. And I do find that to be kind of fascinating, that he knows he's evil, he wants to be evil, and yet he still needed justification for it, which I do find to be really interesting. It's certainly original in comparison to most Bleach villains. You know, characters like Aizen, for instance, even Yuha don't see themselves as the bad guy. Ginjo saw himself as being wronged by the Soul Society. Tokinada, though, he's just a horrible person, basically, and he wants to cause misery because he believes that's how the world is anyway, and he thinks that Soul Society's own history has vindicated that, and I think that's actually really interesting. I want to talk about the stuff with the Soul King a little bit later on. You know, the Soul King to me is still one of Soul Society and Bleach's greatest mysteries, and any kind of tidbits we can get on it, I'll absolutely lap up, so we'll get into all of that in a sec. But now it's time really to move into the bulk of the story, and like I said, the vast majority of this story is set in a big fight, a big skirmish in the Rukongai that sees all races eventually being brought towards it. It's the epicenter, really, of the conflict going on in this story. It starts out as a fight between a couple of sides, then more and more characters keep joining in, and then it interweaves nicely with the main plot line. So what's really cool about this is, in my opinion, it is the true potential realised of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. I've said it before, that the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, one of my absolute favourite things about that story is the way it brings together so many races. Chapters 624, 625 are really the ultimate teasers of that, I think. When Ichigo and his friends, they're in the Royal Realm, they're with Yoruichi, they meet Grimjo and Neliel, who then in turn meet Riruka and Yukio, and they're going to fight Quincy's. You know, when you say it out loud like that, it sounds like the best kind of fan fiction. And in many ways, that is what Can't Fear Your Own World feels like to me as well. It takes those relationships and just blows them out of the water, like just completely. The amount of characters coming together here is crazy. As I said before, it's a tragedy that this is not a manga. I'd love to see this actually, I'd love to see the characters actually realised on the page, interacting together in the way they do. And there are also some great character moments in this story as well, which we'll get into a little bit of. Just some tiny moments that, again, are like nice, deep cuts for fans. And I think that that's what I really appreciate about this book, is the kind of small little things that fans will pick up on. So, but anyway, we've got this big fight going on, and if you know anything about me, as I talked about on this channel, Sternritters versus Execution is like full-on wish fulfillment, and the best kind. And I'd have loved to have seen this in the manga, and I thought we were going to. You know, if you go back and look at my reviews, when Ichigo arrives to fight the Bambis, you know, a part of me was really hoping it was actually Ginjo, because the substitute Shinigami badge could have been him. And, I was like, are we going to get Tsukishima versus Giselle? I thought maybe Giriko versus Meninas, which is actually what we do get in Can't Fear Your Own World, essentially. But, it's just the amount of stuff going on here is crazy. And they do a really good job of creating an awesome choreography out of this fight as well, making the most of the weird and wonderful powers. Because the Fullbringers do have weird abilities. So do the Sternritters, but Candice and Meninas are actually a couple of the more straightforward ones, which, again, just imagining it, lending itself to Kubo's artwork would be insane. As a side note, I have mentioned already that I would absolutely love to create my own version of a Can't Fear Your Own World manga, which will be supported by Patreon. If you go to Patreon, you can check out some examples of my previous work, and I want to take that and make it even better than before, because I think this would be ultra fun to write and draw, and the whole story is already here, so it's just a case of drawing it out. But anyway, I'd love to see these guys interacting on screen. So like I said, the initial fight is pretty crazy. Like Ginjo throws a Getsuga Tencho at Candice, and they all kind of realise that they know Ichigo through each other, essentially. Candice is using electric attacks against them both. Tsukishima uses Book of the End to grow this massive tree to act as a lightning rod, which we've seen in Bleach Brave Souls now. Giriko uses the way the tree was basically he takes all of the time that the tree had technically to grow, hundreds of years, turns himself into a massive beast, launches the tree at them. And it's just, this is so cool. Like, somebody looked into my wish list for Bleach and was like, Sturmitas fighting Ginjo and Tsukishima, let's do this. And they made it crazy. And there's just a couple of little things to point out. It's really interesting, and not just with this fight, but it's really cool seeing how liberally Book of the End is used here. And it's really interesting seeing it from the perspective of it no longer being the primary driver of conflict in the arc. It's now technically just an ability. And Tsukishima uses it so creatively, like bringing up this tree. You also discover, and this is jumping ahead a little bit now, but I'm probably going to be all over the place. You also discover that Tsukishima, is basically going around cutting everyone. Like, Grimjo shows up at one point, he cuts him. He still knows stuff from Orihime's memories, I think. So Tsukishima is like the ultimate knowledge base. Like, it turns out he basically knows absolutely everything because of the people he cuts. He obviously gets insight into the stuff they know. So I thought that was really fascinating. It's just really cool seeing how that's used differently. But like I said, people from all across the world start getting drawn to this battle. Grimjo eventually arrives, and you get a moment where Grimjo fights Ginjo and Tsukishima. Like, that is pure fan service, but again, I would love to, it's so good. That's the kind of fan service I want to see more of. Especially, more Ginjo and Tsukishima getting involved in any capacity is absolutely fine with me. But it starts, like I said, people start coming in. Harabel and Neliel start arriving. They get a little bit worried about how impulsive Grimjo might be, that he might be going after Ichigo, but they also actually interestingly have a bit of faith in Grimjo's maturity now, which I really like to see. Character development across the different races. And Harabel and Neliel are concerned about the diplomatic truce they have with the Shinigami, about that getting broken. That's the sort of thing you love to see. And I will say, again, I'm jumping all over the place, but Can't Fear Your Own World does a brilliant job of showing us how the world has changed after the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. Because the universe of Bleach is pretty straightforward. There's like a couple of major worlds, right? You've got Human World, Soul Society, Wakemundo, Vandenreich, and that's about it, really. That's about it. And in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, all of these races converge, and after that, the world would never be the same again. Everyone knows everyone, truces have to be forged, or wars have to be fought. And I love that this book, and obviously that one, and I'm assuming 3 as well, they just really take the time to show you how the world has changed. Harabel and Neliel are fully in control of Wakemundo. They're actively worried about the truce that they've made with the Shinigami. I love that. I freaking love that. That's such good development for the universe of Bleach. And unfortunately, obviously, with the way things went with Kubo, his illness and stuff like that, and I mentioned this in the original volume review, the end of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc makes that kind of whole arc feel like a weird fever dream, because it's just over like that, and you don't really get to see any consequences. These books do a great job of showing that. And speaking of these truces as well, Volume 2, more so than Volume 1, although Volume 1 was good as well, but Volume 2, they have really interesting discussions. I don't know if maybe it's the novel format, but the dialogue is really great. They talk about really cool stuff that, as a Bleach fan, it's just so good to read. I'm talking about things like, Hisagi actually discussing the fact that he killed Tozen, that sort of thing. And the way that they talk about how, I think it was Urahara and Hisagi, I can't remember off the top of my head now, but they're talking about something like how Arancars are not just animalistic killers, you can actually have a dialogue with these people. And it makes sense, because the Arancars some of them are so human-like. It is a bit weird that they would be viewed by the Shinigami still as just monsters, but they actively aided them in the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, so the fact that they're actually talking about attitudes towards Arancars and having open dialogues with these guys, I absolutely love to see that, because it's great not just to have the Arancars wanting a truce with the Shinigami, but also the Shinigami changing their attitudes to things as well. Anyway, I think we will talk about Hikone, etc. a little bit later on, because there is a bit to go on. Is it just me as well? Does he look really kind of creepy on that cover? I think that's kind of the idea, but he does look a bit weird. Anyway, There's another major storyline happening concurrently with this in the real world, and Urahara and Hisagi have been talking a little bit at the start of this book. Hisagi's been interviewing him on some interesting subjects, things like how he helped out in the war, gave them the Shinyaku pills, but also trying to delve a little deeper into Kisuke's past. And we also find out some interesting stuff about the Urahara Shoten in general. I've kind of compiled a list of like the tiny details I like, but one I want to bring up here is that we actually get a bit of a hint as to what Ururu and Jinta are, finally. Now, I never actually presumed Jinta was anything other than a normal kid, but it seems like they might both be weird. But Kisuke essentially hints at them being what Nemu is, and that he came to that conclusion before Mayuri, and that if Mayuri found out, he would absolutely lose his mind, because obviously Mayuri, at the end of Thousand Year Blood War arc, after the Pernida fight, thinks he's surpassed Kisuke because he's created life, he's created an artificial soul in Nemu, but Kisuke, it seems to imply, at least anyway, that Jinta and Ururu have been around for maybe a bit longer. And actually, I sat down and I thought about this, and I was like, oh yeah, like, Ururu and Nemu have very similar, like reactions to things. Like, Ururu, when she goes kind of weird Terminator form against Ilfort, people wondered for the longest time what that was all about. And in Volume 2, Hisagi tries to guess at what they are. He says, are they Jikongan, they mod souls? Which is cool, because it's kind of like they've taken the theories of the fans and, like, debunked them. Because for the longest time, we thought they were mod souls, basically. But actually, the way Ururu fights Ilfort, goes kind of crazy on him like that, is exactly the same as how Nemu reacts when she thinks Mayuri's about to die against Pernida. She goes Terminator, she goes kind of wide-eyed and blank starey, and she can start like flying really fast. It seems like a machine, essentially, and that's exactly how Ururu acts as well. Jinta, on the other hand, has always felt more like he's just a normal kid to me, but maybe not. Either way, it's really nice to actually get that little piece of info. What's also cool is Kisuke mentions to Hisagi that Ichigo and his friends have all gone away for a while. I guess they've all gone on some big group holiday together. But I like that they think about... Basically, Kisuke says that he stayed behind to remain as the defender of Karakura Town in case anything happened, because Karakura is, of course, the spirit-rich Jurichi, I believe it's pronounced. I can't remember exactly, but that basically just means it's incredibly spiritually rich. It's the exact same reason why Aizen wanted to target it. And Karakura will always have this target on its back from spiritual bad guys, essentially, because it has so many powerful souls in it. And with Ichigo and his entire friend group apparently disappearing for a while, it's nice to know that Kisuke at least has remained behind to make sure that things remain safe. But it's here that we get to properly meet one of the major antagonists of Can't Fear Your Own World, and that's Aura Michibane. And we did mention her briefly in Volume 1, but here she really gets to show what she's all about in a couple of really cool sequences. So she arrives with essentially her cult, surrounding Urahara's shop. We know already that she's the leader of a religious cult calling itself Execution. And she kind of mentions to Hisagi and Urahara that she has a cult of 770,000 people. But none of them were believers straight away. Most of them were converted. And there's a really cool moment that, again, I would love to see drawn, because I think Kubo would just make it look really creepy. But Hisagi essentially, concerned that Aura is a villain, she's trying to attack them. He basically kind of goes to like confront her, and she kills herself. She like impales and decapitates herself on his own blade. But then she catches her head, and she's like, I performed miracles, that's why they follow me. And Aura's whole character is kind of revealed here. Now, of course, I'm planning on doing an Aura character analysis in the future once I finish Volume 3 and I got a full handle on the character from start to finish. But she's very interesting. She is another Fullbringer, but she's different from the others. She's very, very powerful, but for a weird reason, and I kind of like it. It's really unique. So obviously the whole thing about Fullbring is that you eventually come to like love an object or something so much that you can transform it. That's very base level what Fullbring is. Ginjo has his cross, etc. But Aura has nothing. She doesn't have anything like that. And this is because, and we get her past a little bit later on as well, but she was basically locked in a basement her entire life. Again, we'll get into that a bit later, but she never grew an attachment to anything. So because of that, she can use Fullbring at a generic level across all matter. She can transform blood, bones, water, air. She can make her body intangible. She can do effectively anything, which on the surface might sound really, really broken, but actually Can't Fear Your Own World Volume 2 does a really nice job of trying to keep the character grounded, which I really appreciate. One thing I have never liked, and this is a me thing, but one thing I have never liked about the light novels, some of them more than others, is that they, in my opinion, they really just completely disregard any kind of narrative believability for the sake of having ridiculous powers. Just crazy, crazy fan fiction powers that don't make any sense, that really are so hard to defeat. And it's like, well, why has no one else had an ability, anything like this? But Aura's power kind of seems like that, but they do actually try their best at kind of evening it out a bit. I think there's something mentioned, Kisuke mentions that imagine she's a Shinigami with no Zanpakuto, but she can use Kido and Hakuda on the level of Aizen. What's important about that is it establishes Aura as a real credible threat while giving her an innate weakness. She's not all-powerful. You know, a Shinigami missing a Zanpakuto is inherently going to be missing incredible amounts of its own power. And they're also saying, essentially, I know it doesn't quite work like this, but imagine she's 2/3 as strong as Aizen. Basically, because Aizen's a master of all the arts of the Shinigami, that's the point of his character, and Aura is on his level at some of it, but not everything. So she's credibly very powerful, but with a nice weakness. I think it does a great job of balancing her. And as for her cult execution, again, I would love to see them drawn in Kubo's style, because he's so good at the uniform look, creating a uniform for characters. We hear that they've got masks on. We've seen them in Bleach Brave Souls. But they're an interesting group, because Aura actively tries to recruit Kisuke before they actually have any kind of a fight. You know, and you get this impression that she's not evil per se, because she doesn't seem to be really going out of her way to try and kill anybody. There's an amazing, amazing fight between Kisuke and Aura, and I realise again I'm bouncing all over the place here, but I'm just picking out the bits that really stood out to me. The fight between Kisuke and Aura is incredible, and I would love for them to animate Can't Fear Your Own World after the 1,000-Year Blood War arc, which, you know, maybe there's a chance of it happening. This fight would be insane, because like Aura creates enormous dragons out of her own blood. Then she creates them out of water and magma, and you just have these enormous beasts in the sky, which Kisuke then counters with Hado Number 99 Goryu Tenmetsu. And it sounds crazy, and that's the sort of thing you'd absolutely love to see. And apparently Goryu Tenmetsu is forbidden as well, which I guess makes sense. Hado 99 probably going to be forbidden, but I believe Ito Kasso was a forbidden Kido as well, actually. Anyway, regardless, it's a really great spectacle. And one thing I haven't mentioned yet, which I was obviously going to get into, but it's the little snippets of artwork in the book are, once again, just as good as they are in the first volume. They really are, they do act as like these horrible little teasers in a way, like they're so tantalizing. I just wish the whole thing was a manga. But they're so good. I mean, like, this is obviously one that we haven't got to yet, but like Ginjo and Tsukishima versus Ikomikidomoe. It's just so nice seeing Kubo draw these characters again. I absolutely love it. But there's an amazing image basically of Kisuke using Goryu Tenmetsu against Aura, and you get the real sense of scale of that fight, and it's awesome. But just before the fight begins, Kisuke realizes that Karakura has been surrounded and isolated, and then eventually he is kidnapped by Yukio, the Fullbringer, using his game room ability. So something is going on here, something is going down. Execution are making big moves, the cult Execution are making big moves in the real world. They've isolated the Jurichi of Karakura Town, and meanwhile that huge skirmish is still happening in Soul Society. So at this point, Hikone arrives in Soul Society. Like I said, everybody is converging here. Lil Toto and Giselle also arrive from Waco Mundo, and you get the real kind of introduction of his Zanpakuto, Ikomikidomoe, which obviously is not a normal Zanpakuto at all. It can speak, it has its own like real outward sentience to everyone else. And it's awesome as well, because it mentions Baragon, which is such a cool little reference. I absolutely love that. But when he actually uses the Zanpakuto, it turns into this colossal monstrosity, like this enormous creature. which you can sense is absolutely ancient. You know, it's got so much strength, but also things revere it, and it's so world-weary as well. But Hikone is essentially just standing on top of this thing, and they all kind of start having, again, another big skirmish where now there's a new enemy to deal with. Now, like I said, I'm not going to go into crazy granular detail about this, but there are a couple of just little moments that I want to bring up. I love that Grimmjow recalls his fight with my boy Askin Naklavar. It's a shame that he couldn't survive, but Nana Najakoop is in this story for some reason. Obviously working as part of Mayuri's group now. And there's a lot of cool stuff with Mayuri and the Quincy's as well, like saying that if you kind of help us out here, I might set you free, because they're technically part of his corpse unit now. Candice at one point is like hooked up to some kind of machine in like Mayuri's research and development lab. Again, really cool to see the Quincy's being used in this way, actually allowed to survive and continue to thrive in the Bleach universe after it felt like they'd all been annihilated at the end of the 1,000-Year Blood War arc. But really cool to see Grimmjow just recanting his fight with Askin, and basically the fact that they fought Askin's poisons has now kind of actually like hardened their bodies, which actually does kind of make sense, to be fair. There's also a bit where it talks about Yoruichi's Zanpakuto. This is a separate section, I think, entirely, where she and Soifon are essentially sent to protect Tokinada, but Shunsui is running his own kind of game in the background where he obviously massively suspects Tokinada of something really sinister. But they kind of talk about Yoruichi's Zanpakuto, which I thought was a really cool little thing I picked up on. Tokinada mistakenly says that she doesn't have one. And Yoruichi's like, well, no, I do have a Zanpakuto, but I'm just stronger without it. I'm stronger with just Hakuda and Shunpo, but the Zanpakuto does sulk when it doesn't get used. Now, I'll be honest, I kind of thought this was a little bit of a cop-out. I don't buy, how could anyone be stronger without the Zanpakuto? I get that obviously Yoruichi is incredibly skilled at Hakuda and Shunpo, but, she loses to Askin, she loses to Aizen. Would the Zanpakuto have really hurt her chances in those situations? It's difficult to say because we don't know what it does, unless we find out in Volume 3, but I don't think we will. But would it really have hurt? And a Zanpakuto in many ways is supposed to reflect the wielder, so it's a bit weird that her Zanpakuto is apparently useless to her, but, that's just what I thought anyway. But again, it's really cool seeing the noble houses interact. You get a nice little moment between the two of them. Tokinada mentions something about making Yoruichi his wife, to try and strengthen the union, which I thought was really fascinating. And you get little bits about the Shibas as well. Kukaku saying that Ganju, Kaien, and Ishin, well, we know that after the everything with the rain arc, but it's still cool to hear it from her mouth, are not interested anymore in that lifestyle, the noble lifestyle. So I would say probably one of my favourite things about Can't Fear Your Own World so far as a story is the focus on nobility, because it just hasn't been done. Apart from the Kuchikis, it basically hasn't been done in Bleach before, and I've always found that to be kind of weird. I also think this book goes some way to canonise the Zanpakuto Rebellion arc, which is kind of weird, but it does mention about how they talk about the ancestral sword of the one that Tokinada is using. And they mention Muramasa being the ancestral sword of the Kuchiki household and how it had the power to dominate other Zanpakutos. And that's literally the filler arc, the Zanpakuto Rebellion. So, whether the events of that arc actually happened or not, I would say probably not, but it's cool that they've cherry-picked something they liked out of that, and they're like, that can be real. And I think that's really cool. Going back then to the huge skirmish going on, the fact that, everyone's now trying to take on Hikone and Ikomikidomoe, and there's a really nice moment, a really standout moment that I was not expecting with Lil Toto. And she goes and approaches Hikone, essentially. And at this point, everyone is kind of thinking that something is off about Hikone. They've noticed that he's like a patchwork of different kinds of Reiatsu. To many, he even feels a bit like Ichigo at some points. And basically the idea is that they are both perfect hybrids. They are Soul King candidates, as is Kugo Ginjo, who finds that out a bit later as well, which is really, really cool. But I think the point with Hikone is that he has been artificially created to be that way. He is essentially a Frankenstein abomination created by Tokinada to further his own evil goals. But there's a really, really crazy moment that I really liked where Lil Toto approaches Hikone and she kind of senses that he reminds her of someone, and he reminds her of Gremmy, Sturmita V the Visionary, and Hikone reveals that his brain is actually Gremmy's brain. And, when I read that, I was like, right, So to me, what it felt like was, and I'm not saying this is a bad thing, but what it felt like was the writers, when they were coming up with this story, were like, let's look at all of the hanging plot threads in Bleach and go from there. And, you know, they kind of went back through the Thousand Year Blood War arc and they were like, Gremmy's brain, that is never explained. He's just a random brain in a tub. So we'll use that. And actually, I think it works really well because now, you know, we do know a bit more. And it's cool that his brain was picked up and is now part of Hikone. It's kind of crazy. But the real prize to come out of this revelation is a really nice moment where you get a flashback to the Vandenreich War. And Lil Toto and Grammy are having a moment together where Lil Toto goes deep beneath the Silburn castle and frees him from his cage. He is actually literally in a cage that Yhwach has created to house him. And there's just a really nice moment where they share some food together. Like, she's really, really hungry, so he creates her some cakes and pastries. And obviously, they're also both like children, so it's a side of the Sturmritter that we probably desperately needed and never really got, and that is compassion and actually caring about each other, because for the most part, the Sturmritter all came across as being glory hoggers, kill stealers, backstabbers, you know, just horrible people who would attack each other for favour with His Majesty. Really nice to get a calm before the storm moment for the bad guys as well, and actually see that maybe they're not horrible people. And like Grammy as well, I've mentioned this before, but he exists entirely within a vacuum in the Bleach universe, in the Bleach manga, which is incredibly weird, but he exists only in volume 64 to live and die for the fight against Kenpachi. But it's nice to see him have a moment before that as well, with Lil Toto, and she like rages out at Hikone the fact that he has Gremmy's brain. And this led me to kind of see Hikone in a more interesting light as well, because he's not a bad guy. And he's like, why are you attacking me? And I'm really sorry. I don't know what I've done. And Lil Toto's just going after him for this. And in a way, I did kind of feel sorry for Hikone. Like, he's like an abomination that's been created by a madman. And he doesn't know what he's done. You know, he doesn't know that he's done anything wrong. He's now wielding this monstrous hollow Zanpakuto, I think. Ikomikidomoe's not really gone into too much in this story. He does know Barragan Louisenbaum, which is really cool. Someone mentions to him that Barragan has died, which I think is, again, awesome. See Barragan getting mentioned. There's something else with the Espada that I'll mention later on as well. But, yeah, I think that's just a really cool nod again to some of the fallen Espada. And so we kind of reached the end of the story now, thankfully, as this video's been going on for absolutely ages. But basically everyone is kind of coming together. It's similar to the Thousand Year Blood War arc in that sense, I think, so far. But everyone's kind of coming together to have like this one final assault, essentially. Tokinada has created a perfect replica of the Soul King Palace, and he has hidden it in the Valley of Screams, essentially. Now, the Valley of Screams was canonized in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, but it's really cool to see it come back again. They're like pocket dimensions in the Bankai, essentially. Initially introduced in the first movie, Memories of Nobody, but that's really cool anyway. So What's really nice here is, you know, before this happens, Kyoraku goes and talks with Seinosuke about creating an artificial soul. The interesting thing I picked out from this is that apparently Senjumaru can do that as well, which is interesting. But basically, we get a couple of teams, and they're all brought together, and one of the teams is in the Kukaku Shiba house. And again, this is where what I mentioned at the very start of this video really pays off. The sheer number of characters from different races here is off the charts. And just, I would absolutely have loved to have seen this. Again, because maybe I'm alone in this, but one of my favourite moments in the manga was around 613 to 618, where all of the Shinigami characters, plus the Vizards, eventually even some of the Quincy's, are trying to build the gate to the Royal Palace. And it's really nice just to take a break from the fighting and have these characters in one room together, and that's kind of what we got here, but on like an entirely different scale. Characters like Kenpachi and Grimmjow being in the same room together is genuinely what some fans have wanted for years. There's a couple of, again, littered with lovely character moments. Giriko feeling uneasy about Kenpachi being there is brilliant, even though Kenpachi probably barely would give him a second glance, really. But that sort of thing is just so good to read. And it really makes it feel like it's been written by someone who's a true fan of the series. So there are a couple of nice character moments here. Again, like I said, Kukaku uses her spiritual pressure to calm the rowdiness in the room, which seems to earn her the respect of Harabel and Neliel, which I really like. And obviously when Kyoraku arrives, he again calms everyone down. Very much a captain commander, and it's just great seeing him now with even more experience than he had in the Thousand Year Blood War arc, still governing the same way he did, making these kind of crazy decisions, kind of going behind people's backs at time, but very big picture focused. I love that. We discover that all of Aura's 770,000 followers have a mini Tenkai Ketchu attached to them, which is the technology that Mairi created to transport the fake Karakura town, essentially. So these guys have all circled Karakura. They're acting essentially as mini versions of the four great pillars, and that's why Karakura has been isolated. It's been completely locked off from everybody else. There's no way of getting in or out or communicating with anyone who's in there. Meanwhile, the Shinigami arrive in the Valley of Screams, but they fall into a trap. Ikomikidomoe has just spawned hundreds and hundreds of hollows, and they are all going to attack the Shinigami. And it ends on a really nice, very Bleach cliffhanger, where Shinji Hirako kind of acts like he's really terrified, and he runs away from the hollows like, oh my god, but actually he's just luring the hollows away from everybody else, because he then activates his Bankai Sakashima Yokoshima Happo Fusagari. And again, like, you get a couple of really great pages, really great artwork, and you know, this is probably as close as we're going to get to ever actually seeing Shinji's Bankai in the manga, but it's, you know, you get at least a couple of drawings here. Clearly Kubo went out of his way a bit more with this, but like, you get this really awesome one. I will also show them on the screen. Don't really know why I'm doing this, but you get this cool one of Shinji facing off against all the hollows, and then, you know, this awesome one as well of him looking like a badass. Yeah, Shinji does get some really cool stuff here. This is really cool to see, and I know for a fact, thanks to Brave Souls and stuff, that we do actually see his Bankai. But yeah, that's the end of the book, essentially, ending on that kind of cliffhanger. Shinji also mentions indirectly Gerard Valkyrie, which is pretty random, but we then get like almost like an epilogue. It's called Interlude 2, but it shows an early kind of meeting between Kaname, Tozen, and Aizen, which is always great with me. And it's interesting because Kaname views Aizen truly as like a god. He sees him as someone who is beyond the duality of good and evil, someone to whom fear and despair are completely alien. And now obviously this is early Aizen, but I think he definitely feels despair and maybe even fear in the fight with Ichigo, which is cool. But yeah, it's really interesting seeing this early meeting between them. Can't Fear Your Own World Volume 2 does have one crazy kind of final revelation to give, however, and that's when Aizen was trying to build his own Hogyoku when he was shaving souls in the Rukongai to offer to it. He discovered something pretty strange, and that's the Hogyoku wasn't really reacting until it had some of Rangiku's soul. And we've known this for a while. We've kind of known that she was an important component to the creation of his Hogyoku. But it turns out that apparently within her soul, infused in her soul, is a nail of the Soul King, which is kind of gross thinking about it. But apparently those nails are also embedded in every Fullbringer to an extent. And the volume ends a little bit nebulously regarding the truth of the Soul King and Kaname finding out the truth. And then, like, you know, asking Aizen for one wish. And then that's basically the end of the book. And so, yeah, that is Volume 2 of Can't Fear Your Own World. It's a meaty book, and there's a good amount going on here, and it does advance the story nicely. But for me, it's not so much the main plot that's making it really interesting, but all the tiny little insights we get into the world of Bleach that we have missed out on beforehand. So there's a couple of extra things I want to talk about very briefly. This video's already been massively long, so if you're still here, I really appreciate it. There's a couple of small details I noticed that I just want to talk about. So, at the very, very start of the book, Tokinada's father mentions to him that, you know, the Soul King is like this such a mystical thing. It's so unknown that the name Soul King doesn't even exist in the vocabulary of people in the Rukongai. And I still wonder if that's true today, because obviously Ganju is from the Rukongai, the Shibas are there. Ganju has seen the Soul King at this point, so whether or not people actually know, I know for the most part people were sworn to secrecy about the existence of the Soul King and what actually happened up there, so maybe he hasn't said anything, but I wonder if knowledge is more widespread now when you consider the amount of people who have been to the Royal Palace. On a totally different note, the character of Torue is mentioned. I think her name is Torue. Very random, again, another deep cut for Bleach fans, but she is the purple-haired member of the research and development team that grabs Kon during one of the chapter omakes in the volumes. Can't remember which one exactly. But that's just so random, but it's a cool little detail. And it's the sort of thing, like I said, that I like about this. There's one moment where Kyoraku is kind of reflecting on how these newfound pressures are affecting him as Captain Commander, and he wonders how Genryusai would have dealt with that. I freaking love that. Like, you know, Kyoraku is all firing on all cylinders when he becomes the Captain Commander, so he's given little time for introspection, really, about his new duties, and I kind of love that he is wondering how Yamamoto would have dealt with that. I think that's exactly in his character as one of Yamamoto's children. Really awesome. There are actually a couple of major revelations. As I mentioned, Ginjo is kind of revealed to be a Soul King candidate based on his patchwork Reiatsu, which I think is, again, kind of fascinating. And Orihime is also, I think, confirmed to be a Fullbringer in this, which is really neat. And it kind of is just a bit weird as well, because like no one's ever said anything about Orihime's powers being so easily quantifiable, but I guess they were just like, enough of the speculation, she's just a Fullbringer. But it makes sense because she's got an attachment to who her hairpiece is, so why not? Makes complete sense. A very random small piece, but if you remember Shino and Yuki from the very early stages of the Thousand Year Blood War arc, well, we found out that Shino is related to Ikaku, but it turns out Yuki is actually related to Rikichi from Squad 6, who is only ever in the Soul Society arc, but he like completely reveres Renji to the point where he has a tattoo. He's starting his own tattoo collection, but again, super deep cut. Don't know why Rikichi's really brought up, but and I also don't know why Rikichi never returned again after the Soul Society arc, but there you go. And finally, the last small thing I want to talk about that really stood out to me and I wasn't expecting at all is towards the end when the group has all gathered together and Kyoraku is talking about how they can form this truce between all the races to kind of come together and deal with this threat. And Harabel essentially makes him swear on the memory of Stark. And I was like, what? I did not expect that at all. Didn't expect Stark to get name dropped, even though it did happen in the Thousand Year Blood War arc once, I think. I think it was only once. But it's great because it shows that, yes, Kyoraku did actually respect Stark. And I remember a lot of people, you know, people have always been so bummed out by the ending of that fight. Like, Kyoraku just killing Stark, letting him fall, and then he's gone. When they seem to have such a, almost like an understanding of each other. Like I said, like we know, Kyoraku is a man of action, really. He does what he has to do for the law when it comes down to it. But it's so nice to see this acknowledgement that both Shunsui and Harabel have a real respect for Stark. I love that. I think it's great. Stark was, you know, basically the most powerful Arankar, really, for a long period of time. And I think I just think it's so good. I think it works really well, and it adds another layer to Kyoraku, and it adds another layer to their fight as well, I think, because it shows that they did have a respect for each other, and I really enjoyed that. But at the end of the day, that is a great example of why I enjoyed this novel so much. It's more of the same of Volume 1, essentially, and if you're a Bleach fan, it's an essential read. It's full of those kind of deep-cut references that I think work really well. You can tell this is written by someone who has a real passion for the series, and what I like about it most is that, unlike other light novels, I really think it tries its absolute best to follow established canon conventions to really make it feel like it fits within the Bleach universe. You know, like, people really like the character of Azashiro from Spirits Are Forever With You, and I agree that he is cool on paper, but I still think his, like, abilities and his Zanpakuto are just absolutely ridiculous to the point of near unbelievability. That's what I'm talking about when I say it's fanfiction-y. But I think Can't Fear Your Own World Volume 2 does just a great job of keeping it as grounded as possible and telling a really good story in the Bleach universe and adding so much to the Thousand Year Blood War arc before it. Alright guys, but that was a very long video. I hope you enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments below what you think of Can't For Your Own World Volume 2. Did you enjoy it as much as the first one? If you've read Volume 3, try and keep spoilers to a minimum. It's not out here yet in the UK, and I want to read them actually in their physical novel forms. So yeah, but I really appreciate you guys for all your support. Drop a like if you enjoyed it. Check out the Patreon if you want to help support the channel even more. And until next time, I'll catch you later. I'll see you then.